When I first covered these encounters, I didn't expect what came next. Within days of that episode going live, my inbox started filling up. Not with opinions, not with theories, with stories. Personal accounts from veterans, active duty, even a few from family members who said their husband or brother or son came back from a deployment or a training rotation and was never quite the same. Not wounded, not sick, just different, quieter. Wouldn't go near the woods anymore. Wouldn't explain why. I read every single one of them. And I'll be honest with you, most didn't make the cut. Not because I didn't believe the person writing it, but because the encounter was too brief, too vague, or too easily explained away by the usual suspects. Animals, shadows, exhaustion, the mind filling in blanks. But these next 3 accounts, these I couldn't put down. These kept me up at night in a way that Part 1 didn't. Because in Part 1, the encounters were frightening, sure. But there was distance. A bush. A tree line. 75 meters of dark forest between the service member and whatever was watching them. In these stories, that distance closes. And when it does, the details get harder to explain away. I'm Luke Lamanna, and this is Wartime Stories. Before we get into it, I want to take a second to talk about AG1. Look, I've talked openly on this show about the fact that between the research, the writing, the recording, and everything else that goes into producing wartime stories, I don't always take care of myself the way I should. Meals get skipped. Sleep gets inconsistent. And when you're running on caffeine and momentum, your body starts sending you signals that something's off. That's why I started taking AG1. It's 1 scoop, 1 drink, and it covers your daily vitamins, minerals, prebiotics, and probiotics. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it turned me into a superhero. But I will tell you that since I've been consistent with it, I feel more level. More even throughout the day. And honestly, that matters when you're spending your evenings reading accounts of things that crawl on all fours in the dark. If you want to try it, go to drinkag1.com/wartimestories. That's drinkag1.com/wartimestories. You'll get a free welcome kit and a free supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 with your first subscription. All right, let's get back into it. Sergeant Torres, you copy? Torres here. Go ahead. You still at OP3? Yeah. You see anything south of you? Past the drainage? Negative. Why? Torres. I'm here. Hold on. What? Something just moved down there. Copy. Stay on it. It's not walking right. What do you mean? I mean it's not walking right. This next account was sent directly to me by a former Army infantryman who served with the 10th Mountain Division. He asked that I use only his first name, Aaron. The events he describes took place during a training exercise in the mountains of northern Georgia, at a facility I won't name at his request, in the late fall of 2019. What makes Aaron's story stand out isn't just what he saw. It's what happened after. He writes, "We were 3 days into a 5-day field problem. The scenario was a standard company-level movement to contact with a few ambush lanes built into the rotation. Nothing exotic. The terrain was a mix of dense hardwoods and steep ravines, the kind where you're grabbing roots and rocks just to keep your footing. Elevation changes could hit 400 feet in a quarter mile. If you've trained in the North Georgia mountains, you know exactly what I'm talking about. By day 3, most of us were running on maybe 6 hours of sleep total. That's not an exaggeration. Between security rotations, movement, and the cadre throwing curveballs at us every few hours, you'd be lucky to get 45 minutes of uninterrupted rest. Your brain starts doing weird things at that level of exhaustion. You see shapes in the dark. Sounds get amplified or distorted. I knew this going in. I'd been through it before. So, when I first noticed something off, I almost talked myself out of it entirely. We had set up a platoon patrol base along a ridgeline that overlooked a deep ravine to the south. Thick canopy. Below us, maybe 200 meters downslope, there was a creek bed that we'd crossed earlier that day. The cadre had told us to expect OP-4 probes throughout the night, so we had OPs, observation posts, set up in a triangle around our perimeter. I was on OP-3, the southern position, paired with a guy from 2nd Squad named Dominguez. Around 0200, Dominguez was asleep. My shift. I had my nods on and I was scanning the ravine below us, just doing slow sweeps left to right to left. Routine. The woods were doing what woods do at night. Creaking, rustling, the occasional branch falling. Normal ambient noise. Then it stopped. I don't mean it got quieter. I mean it stopped. Like someone had pressed mute on everything. No insects. No wind through the canopy. No small animals moving through the leaf litter. Nothing. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels pressurized, like your ears are trying to compensate for the absence of sound. I've experienced this a handful of times in my life, and it's never been followed by something normal. When the woods go that quiet, something is there that the rest of the forest doesn't want to be near. That's not superstition. That's what animals do. They shut up when a predator is close. I keyed my radio to whisper to the other OP teams and ask if they had anything. OP-1, negative. OP-2, negative. But OP-2 added something that got my attention. He said, and I remember his exact words, "Nothing on our end, but the frogs down by the creek just went dead silent about 2 minutes ago." So, it wasn't just in my head. Something was down in that ravine. I started scanning more deliberately. Slower sweeps. Longer pauses. Trying to pick up thermal contrast or movement through the nods. And then I caught it. Not movement exactly, but a shape that didn't belong to the landscape. Through the green glow of my night vision, down near the creek bed, maybe 150 meters from our position, I could see what I initially thought was a fallen log. But I'd been staring at that same stretch of creek for 2 hours, and that log hadn't been there before. I watched it for maybe 30 seconds. Nothing. Completely still. I almost moved on. Almost. But then the log shifted. Not like an animal getting up. Not like a person rolling over. It shifted the way a lizard moves. One sudden, fluid repositioning of its entire body, and then total stillness again. But this thing was not the size of a lizard. Even at 150 meters and with mediocre nods, I could tell it was large. Long. If it stood up, I estimated it would be somewhere around 5 to 6 feet, but it wasn't standing. It was flat. Pressed against the ground like it was trying to melt into the creek bed. I woke Dominguez. Didn't shake him, just put my hand over his mouth and squeezed his shoulder. He knew the drill. Came awake fast and quiet. I told him to put his nods on and look south toward the creek. Told him to look just left of the big boulder we'd used as a reference point during our brief. He found it faster than I expected. "Is that a person?" he whispered. "I don't know," I said. "It's not moving." It was. We watched together for about 2 minutes. And in those 2 minutes, the thing moved twice more. Both times that same lizard-like lateral shift. Quick. Precise. No wasted motion. Each time, it repositioned itself a little further up the slope. A little closer to us. Dominguez keyed the radio. OP-3 to CP. "We've got movement in the ravine. Single entity." approximately 130 meters south of our POS, requesting guidance. The response from our platoon sergeant was predictable. Roger. OP-3. Likely OP-4. Continue to observe. Do not engage unless engaged. OP-4. Sure. Except OP-4 doesn't move like that. OP-4 is a bunch of guys from another platoon wearing Miles gear and trying not to trip over roots in the dark. OP-4 doesn't press itself flat against a creek bed and move without making a single sound. OP-4 doesn't cause every living thing in a quarter-mile radius to go silent. We watched it for another 10 minutes. During that time, it covered maybe 40 meters up the slope toward us. Still on the ground. Still that same stop-and-shift pattern. But now it was close enough that I could start making out details, and that's when my stomach dropped. The skin was pale. Not Caucasian pale. Not this person doesn't get enough sun pale. It was white. A flat, almost chalky white that caught the moonlight in a way that skin shouldn't. It had no clothes, no gear, no pack, and its proportions were wrong. The limbs were too long for the torso. The arms, specifically, extended out in front of it as it moved, and they seemed to bend at points where there shouldn't be joints. Dominguez was breathing faster. I could hear it. I put my hand on his arm. Steady. That's not OP-4, he said. No, I said. It's not. Then what is it? At roughly 90 meters, it stopped. And it did something that, even now, years later, I have difficulty describing without my hand shaking. It lifted its head. Slowly. Deliberately. And it looked directly at our position. Not in our general direction. At us. The way you look at someone when you know exactly where I didn't answer him because I didn't have one, YR. 2 points of reflected light where its eyes were. Not eye shine the way you'd see from a deer or a raccoon. This was different. Duller. Like light reflecting off wet stone. We froze. Both of us. And I mean froze in the most primal sense of the word. Not a tactical decision. Not discipline. My body simply refused to move. Every instinct I had was screaming two contradictory things at once. Run and don't you dare move. It held that position for what felt like forever but was probably 15 seconds. Then it lowered its head, rotated its body, and I mean rotated like its spine had no fixed orientation, and moved laterally along the slope. Fast. Faster than anything on a 30-degree grade covered in wet leaves should be able to move. It disappeared into a fold in the terrain, a small gully that fed into the main ravine, and it was gone. The sounds came back gradually. Frogs first. Then insects. Then the wind. Like the forest was exhaling. Dominguez and I sat there for the rest of our shift without saying a word. When we got relieved at 0400, we went back to the patrol base and just lay there. We didn't sleep. I don't think either of us even closed our eyes. Here's the part that I mentioned earlier. The part that stays with me more than the sighting itself. The next morning during our debrief, the platoon sergeant asked for reports from the OPs. When it got to us, I gave a sanitized version. Movement in the ravine. Single figure. Likely animal. Moved off to the east. Couldn't get a positive ID. The platoon sergeant nodded and moved on. But after the brief, one of the cadre, a staff sergeant who'd been running training rotations at that facility for years, pulled me aside. He didn't ask me what I'd seen. He told me, "You saw something down by the creek last night." It wasn't a question. Roger, staff sergeant. He nodded slowly. Pale. Low to the ground. Moved fast. I just stared at him. He took that as a yes. "You're not the first," he said. "Happens about once or twice a year out here. Usually during fall rotations when the temperature drops. Don't know what it is. Don't want to know. My advice? Don't go looking for answers. You won't find any that make you feel better. Just know it's never come into a patrol base. It watches. That's it. So far. 2 words. So far. That, so far, has lived in my head rent-free ever since. Because what he was telling me, in his own way, was that this thing, whatever it was, had shown restraint. Not inability. Restraint. And the implication of that is something I'd rather not think about too hard. What? You hear that? Hear what? I don't hear any. Exactly. Aaron's mention of the cadre member acknowledging these sightings is not unique. In fact, it's becoming a pattern I can't ignore. Several of the accounts I've received, not all, but enough, include a moment where someone in a position of authority quietly confirms that the person isn't crazy. Not officially. Never on paper. Just a quiet word. A knowing look. A simple, "Yeah, we know." And then a firm suggestion to drop it. That brings me to the second account, which comes from a former Navy corpsman, a combat medic who serves with Marine infantry units, named Reyes. His encounter took place during pre-deployment training at Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center in Bridgeport, California, the Sierra Nevadas. For those unfamiliar, Bridgeport is about as remote as it gets in the continental United States. High desert transitioning into alpine terrain. Thin air. Brutal cold. The kind of place where the nearest town is 45 minutes away on a good day, and the nearest anything is even further. Most people associate pale crawler sightings with the dense forests of the East Coast, Appalachia, the Carolinas, the pine woods of the South. What makes Reyes' account notable is that it takes place out west, in terrain that couldn't be more different. Open ridgelines. Sparse tree cover. High-altitude basins where you can see for miles in every direction. If these things only existed in the deep woods of the eastern United States, they shouldn't be here. But according to Reyes, one was. He writes, "This was February 2017. We were at MCMWTC for a winter package. Cold weather survival, mountain movement, all of that. If you've been to Bridgeport in winter, you know it's a special kind of miserable. Daytime highs in the teens. Nighttime lows well below zero. The kind of cold where your snot freezes before it leaves your nose and your rifle feels like a block of ice no matter how many times you cycle the bolt. Our company had moved into the high country for a 4-day exercise. We were operating above 9,000 feet, in snow that was waist-deep in places. Movement was slow. Brutal. We were using snowshoes and skis for mobility, and even with those, it took everything you had to cover ground. The exhaustion hit different up there. It's not just the physical effort, it's the altitude. Your body is burning calories just to stay warm and keep oxygen in your blood. Sleep was limited and shattered. 2 hours on, 2 hours off for security. On the second night, my squad was tasked with establishing a remote observation post about a kilometer north of the main company position, along a ridgeline that overlooked a long, narrow valley. The terrain was mostly open, a few clusters of stunted pines and rock outcroppings, but nothing like the forests you'd find at lower elevations. Visibility with nods was exceptional because of the snow. The moonlight reflected off everything and gave you this eerie, almost daylight quality view of the landscape. There were 4 of us up there. Me, the squad leader, a saw gunner named Petty, and a rifleman named Ochoa. We rotated security in pairs. I was paired with Ochoa for the 0100 to 0300 shift. About 40 minutes into our shift, Ochoa nudged me and pointed east, down into the valley. He didn't say anything, just pointed. I followed his finger and saw what had caught his attention. Something was moving across the valley floor. At first, I assumed it was an animal, a coyote, maybe, or a mountain lion. We'd been briefed on wildlife in the area. But as I watched, I realized the movement pattern was wrong. It wasn't the fluid, four-legged gait of a canine or a feline. It was more like, and I know this sounds strange, more like someone crawling fast, unnaturally fast across the snow. And this thing was covering ground. I'd estimate it was moving at 15 to 20 miles per hour across relatively flat terrain, but on all fours. In deep snow. Without sinking. That last detail bothered me more than anything else at first. We were post-holing with every step, even with snowshoes. This thing was skimming across the surface like it weighed nothing. I got the binos up. These were standard issue 7x50s, nothing fancy, but between the magnification and the moonlight on the snow, I got a decent look. It was pale, bone white against the snow, which should have made it invisible, but the way it moved created contrast, a shape that was somehow whiter than the white around it, if that makes sense. Long limbs. I could see the arms, if you want to call them that, reaching forward and pulling its body along. The legs pushed from behind in a motion that reminded me of a spider more than anything mammalian. I handed the binos to Ochoa. He watched for about 10 seconds, then lowered them and looked at me. Even through his balaclava and goggles, I could see the confusion on his face. "Doc, what the hell is that?" "I don't know. That's not a person." "No." "Should we wake up Staff Sergeant?" We debated for a few seconds, but by the time we decided to wake him, the thing had stopped. Dead center in the valley, maybe 600 meters from our position. It just stopped and sat, crouched, I guess, motionless in the snow. And then its head turned toward us. Now, at 600 meters with 7x magnification, I couldn't make out fine facial details. But I could see the shape of the head, and it was wrong. Too round. Too smooth. No visible ears. No hair. And the eyes, there was something about the eyes. They didn't reflect light the way animal eyes do. It was more like they absorbed it. Like looking at two dark holes in a white surface. Ochoa woke the squad leader. Staff Sergeant Kimball came up beside us, groggy and irritated, and I directed him to the valley floor. He brought his own optics up and went quiet. A long, uncomfortable quiet. Then he lowered them and said, "How long has it been sitting there?" "About 2 minutes, Staff Sergeant." "Has it moved?" "No." It stopped and turned toward us. He watched for another minute. Then the thing moved again. But not away from us. Toward us. Same crawling, pulling, weapons hot. Skimming movement. Closing distance. Kimball didn't hesitate. "Wake Petty." Everyone on the line. We were all up and watching within 30 seconds. 4 Marines, weapons oriented down into the valley, watching this thing close the distance. 500 meters. 400. 300. At 300 meters, Kimball got on the radio to the company CP. "Warlord, this is Reaper 3. We've got an unidentified figure approaching our POS from the east. Single entity. Moving on all fours. Not believed to be wildlife or OP4. Requesting guidance. Over. The response took longer than it should have. When it came, it was just, Reaper 3, Warlord. Roger. Continue to observe. Report any change. Do not engage unless hostile intent is demonstrated. At 200 meters, it stopped again, and this time it stood up. I will never forget what that looked like. The way it unfolded itself from the ground, there's no other word for it. Like a carpenter's ruler opening up. Joint after joint after joint, sections of limbs straightening and locking into place until it was upright, and it was tall. Maybe 6.5 feet, but so thin that it looked even taller. The proportions were grotesque. Arms that hung past its knees. A torso that seemed too short for the rest of it. Legs that bent slightly wrong, like the knees were hyperextended. It stood there, facing us, in the moonlight on the snow, completely exposed, completely motionless, for what the squad leaders' watch later confirmed was 11 minutes. 11 minutes. We were 4 armed Marines on a ridgeline with clear fields of fire and every advantage the terrain could offer, and not one of us moved. Not one of us spoke. We just watched it, and it watched us. Then it dropped. Not crouched. Dropped. Like a marionette whose strings had been cut. It hit the snow flat and immediately began moving, not toward us this time, but south along the valley floor, back the way it had come. Within 30 seconds, it was gone, swallowed by distance and darkness. Staff Sergeant Kimball lowered his weapon and exhaled. The sound of that exhale, long, shaky, controlled, told me more about what he was feeling than anything he could have said. "Nobody saw that," he said. "Staff Sergeant." I said nobody saw that. We observed an unidentified animal at distance. It moved off. That's what goes in the report. Copy. We all copied. And that is, in fact, what went in the report. Unidentified animal. Observed at distance. Departed the area without incident. But here's what didn't go in the report, and what I haven't been able to shake. When the thing was standing there at 200 meters, when it was fully upright and facing us in the moonlight, it did something that I've never seen any animal do. It tilted its head. Slowly. Deliberately. The way a person does when they're curious about something. The way you tilt your head when you're studying something and trying to figure it out. It wasn't afraid of us. It wasn't threatened by us. 4 Marines with rifles and a saw, and this thing stood in the open and studied us like we were the interesting ones. Like we were the ones who didn't belong. I've spent a lot of time since then trying to rationalize what I saw. I've considered every possibility. A person in some kind of suit. An emaciated animal. A hallucination from altitude and sleep deprivation shared by 4 people simultaneously. None of them hold up. I know what I saw. I just don't know what it was. Did you hear what 3rd Platoon reported last night?
No.
What? Some kind of animal up on the ridge. An animal. That's what the report says. But Ochoa told me it wasn't an animal. Well, what did Ochoa say it was? He didn't. He just said it wasn't an animal and then stopped talking about it. Rhea's account raises a question I've been sitting with for a while now, and one that I think deserves attention. If these things exist, if we accept even the possibility that something matching these descriptions is out there, then we need to consider the geographic implications. Because we're no longer talking about a phenomenon limited to the hollows of Appalachia or the swamps of the Lowcountry. If Reyes and his squad saw what they describe above 9,000 feet in the Sierra Nevadas, in open terrain, in the dead of winter, then whatever this is, It's not confined to one ecosystem. It's not a regional species. It's either something that exists across a much wider range than anyone has assumed, or, and I realize this sounds even more unsettling, it's something that follows. Something that goes where people go. Particularly where they go when they're isolated, exhausted, and far from help. I don't know which of those possibilities is worse. What I do know is that this final story, the longest and most detailed account I received following Part 1, suggests that these things aren't just watching us from tree lines and ridge lines. They may be much, much closer than we think. This account comes from a former Army Ranger who asked to be identified only as Cole. He served with the 75th Ranger Regiment and deployed multiple times to both Iraq and Afghanistan. By his own admission, he has experienced more than his share of combat, has lost friends, and has dealt with the psychological toll that comes with that life. He tells me this because he wants to make clear that he is not someone who scares easily, and that what he experienced at Fort Benning, now Fort Moore, in the winter of 2016 was unlike anything he'd encountered before or since, including combat. He writes, I want to preface this by saying I've sat with this for years. I've gone back and forth about whether to ever put it down in writing. But after listening to your first episode about pale crawlers, I recognized too many details that matched my own experience, and I felt like it was time. This happened during a training cycle at Fort Benning, late 2016. We were running a small unit tactics package in one of the more remote ranges on the installation, an area thick with Georgia pine and underbrush that hadn't been maintained or cleared in a long time. The training was intensive, raids, ambushes, recons, and was running around the clock. Sleep was a luxury. We were averaging maybe 3 hours in a 24-hour period, and that was broken up. For context, I need to explain something about this particular range. It backed up against a large tract of land that, to my knowledge, was unused and had been for years. There were old concrete foundations scattered through the woods back there, remnants of buildings that had been demolished decades ago. Some of the older NCOs had told us stories about that area. Nothing supernatural. Just practical warnings. Stay out of there. It's off-limits. The terrain is unstable. Old wells, old foundations, unexploded ordnance from past training. Standard stuff. But one of the NCOs, a master sergeant who'd been at Benning for the better part of a decade, had pulled a few of us aside during a previous training cycle and said something that, at the time, I dismissed. He told us that range control had received reports, plural, over the years of unusual activity in the back portion of that range. Not trespassers. Not animals. He used the word unusual very deliberately and didn't elaborate beyond saying, if you see something that doesn't look right, report it and move on. Don't investigate. Don't pursue. I filed it away and forgot about it. Until the third night of that training cycle. We had established a patrol base in a draw between two low ridges. Dense tree cover on all sides, limited visibility even with nods. My team had been tasked with running a recon of an objective about 2 clicks east of the patrol base. There were 6 of us. We moved out around 2,300 and were supposed to reach the objective, conduct our surveillance, and be back before first light. The movement was uneventful for the first hour. Standard patrol. Point man navigating, rear security keeping watch behind us, everyone spaced and disciplined. The woods were thick but manageable. We'd trained in worse. About 90 minutes into the movement, our point man, a team leader named Briggs, raised a fist. Everyone stopped. I moved up to his position, and he pointed to the ground without saying a word. I looked down and saw tracks in the soft mud along a shallow drainage. At first, I thought they were boot prints, someone from another element who'd been through the area. But when I got closer and actually studied them, they weren't boot prints. They weren't animal tracks either. They looked like hand prints. Long, splayed fingers pressed deep into the mud. And next to them, slightly behind, what looked like the impressions of feet, narrow, elongated, with toes that seemed to grip into the earth. Whatever had made these was moving on all fours. Briggs looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us said anything. We marked the grid, I made a mental note, and we kept moving. Mission first. Always mission first. We reached the objective around 0130 and set in for our surveillance. The objective was an old vehicle staging area, a clearing with some rusted-out Conex boxes and a couple of concrete pads. Our job was to observe, sketch the layout, identify entry points, and report back. Standard reconnaissance. We split into 2 teams. I took my 3 to the north side of the clearing. Briggs took his 3 to the south. We established our positions, settled in, and began our observation. For about 30 minutes, nothing happened. The clearing was empty. The wind moved through the pines above us, and that was about it. Then Briggs broke squelch on the radio. 2 clicks. Attention. I scanned toward his position but couldn't see his team through the vegetation. A moment later, his voice came through, barely audible even with the earpiece pressed tight. Cole. Northeast corner. Conex box. Something just came out from behind it. I shifted my nods to the northeast corner of the clearing. The Conex box he was referring to was a rusted shipping container, the kind you see on the back of a semi-truck. The door was partially open and angled in a way that created a dark void behind it. And from that void, something was emerging. It came out low, belly almost touching the ground. The first thing I saw was an arm, long, pale, the forearm alone easily 3 feet, reaching out from behind the Conex and pressing flat against the ground. Then the head, smooth, hairless, a sickly white that looked almost luminescent through the green tint of my nods. It eased itself out the way a snake slides from a hole. No urgency, no caution, just this slow, deliberate, fluid emergence. When it was fully out, it crouched beside the Conex and stayed perfectly still. And I got a good look at it. It was emaciated. I could see ribs. I could see the outline of its spine pressing against the skin of its back. Its legs were folded underneath it, knees splayed out to the sides in a way that no human knee should be able to go. The arms were planted in front of it, elbows locked, fingers splayed wide on the concrete pad. And the head was slowly panning left to right, like a security camera doing a sweep. I counted my heartbeats. I got to 47 before it moved again. It suddenly shifted its weight forward and began crossing the clearing. Not walking. Not running. It was doing that same movement that's been described in every single one of these encounters. A rapid, spider-like crawl that covered ground at a speed that made no mechanical sense. It crossed the clearing, roughly 60 meters, in what I estimated was 3 to 4 seconds. And it made almost no sound doing it. Just a faint, rhythmic scraping, like dry skin against concrete. It stopped at the far side of the clearing, near the tree line, and folded back into that crouched position. Its head resumed the slow pan. Left to right. Left to right. Then it locked onto our side of the clearing. My side. I don't know if it saw me. I don't know if it could see in the dark the way we could with our nods. But the way its head stopped and oriented directly toward my position, with a precision that felt intentional, it knew something was there. I did not move. I did not breathe. I have been in firefights. I have been shot at. I have had RPGs pass close enough to feel the heat. None of that produced the kind of fear I felt lying in that bush watching this thing look in my direction. Because in combat, the threat is human. You understand it. You can predict it. You can fight it. This, I did not understand. And the things you don't understand are the things that terrify you the most. After maybe 20 seconds of staring in my direction, it dropped its head and moved into the tree line. Not the way an animal enters the woods, crashing, rustling, snapping branches. It entered the woods the way a shadow enters a dark room. One moment it was at the edge. The next moment it wasn't. I waited a full 2 minutes before I keyed the radio. Briggs. Yeah. His voice was tight. We're leaving. Roger that. We collapsed our positions and moved out. No debrief. No discussion. We just moved. The entire 2-click patrol back to the patrol base, I kept my head on a swivel. Every shadow was a threat. Every sound was a warning. When we got back and checked through security, I found the platoon leader and told him we needed to relocate the patrol base before daylight. He asked why. I told him we'd encountered an unidentified animal at the objective and that I didn't want to risk it tracking us back. He gave me a strange look but didn't argue. We relocated a click to the south before dawn. I never told him what we actually saw. I never told anyone outside of the 6 men who were there. We talked about it once, that same night, after we'd settled into the new position. Briggs said he thought it was some kind of primate. One of the other guys said maybe it was a person on drugs. Nobody believed their own theory. We all knew what we'd seen didn't fit into any category we had. The Master Sergeant's warning came back to me the next day. If you see something that doesn't look right, report it and move on. Don't investigate. Don't pursue. He knew. He'd either seen one himself or heard enough reports to know they were real. And his solution was the same one every other person in a position of authority seems to arrive at. Don't talk about it. File it away. Keep it moving. But here's the thing that eats at me. That clearing, that staging area, it wasn't just a random spot in the woods. It was a designated objective that rotating units used for training exercises. Multiple times a year, small teams of soldiers are sent to that exact clearing to conduct the exact same kind of surveillance we were doing. And if that thing was living in or around those Connex boxes, then every single one of those teams was being watched. And most of them probably never knew it. I think about the tracks we found on the way in. The handprints in the mud. Those were on the route to the objective. The designated route. The one that units are briefed to use. Which means whatever that thing was, it wasn't just near our path. It was on it. Like it knew where we'd be walking. Like it had learned the pattern. Cole, you good? Yeah. Yeah, I'm good. You sure? Just keep moving, Briggs. What about the report? We saw an animal. That's all we saw. That wasn't an animal, Cole. I know. I sat with Cole's account for a long time before deciding to include it. Not because I doubted him. His details are too specific, too consistent with other reports, and too visceral to feel fabricated. But because of what his story implies. And what it implies is deeply uncomfortable. If these things are present on active military installations, in areas where soldiers train regularly, in structures that sit on designated exercise routes, then they're not hiding from us. They're living alongside us. In the margins. In the gaps. In the places we build and then forget about. The abandoned buildings, the unused ranges, the old foundations, the filled-in wells. We keep going back to the same question. What are they? And I keep arriving at the same answer. I don't know. Nobody does. The descriptions are remarkably consistent. Pale skin, elongated limbs, rapid quadrupedal movement, an apparent intelligence, and a tendency to observe rather than attack. But consistency of description doesn't give us a species. It doesn't give us an origin. It doesn't tell us whether these things are biological, something else, or something we don't have a category for yet. What it does tell us is that whatever they are, they're not going away. And they're not staying in one place. From the swamps of Paris Island to the pine forests of Georgia. From the hills of Fort Knox to the mountains of the Sierra Nevadas. From an abandoned house in West Virginia to a rusted Conex box at Fort Benning. These encounters span decades, branches, and terrain types. The only common thread is the people who see them, service members, trained observers, men and women who are taught to identify threats in low visibility conditions and report what they see accurately. And every single one of them comes away saying the same thing. That wasn't an animal. That wasn't a person. I don't know what it was. But it was real. Don't what? Don't look back. Wartime Stories is created and hosted by me, Luke LaManna. Written by Jake Howard and myself. Audio editing, sound design, mixing, mastering, and production coordination by Alex Carpenter with additional audio work by me. Animation and motion design by Hot Sauce Video. Research by Jake Howard and myself. Artwork by Picata. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around for the after action and the credits. Part 2. We went deeper. And honestly, I kind of wish we hadn't. Not because the stories aren't fascinating. They are, but because the more accounts I read, the harder it becomes to dismiss the whole thing as collective imagination. One guy sees something weird in the woods during boot camp? Sure. Sleep deprivation. 2 guys at Fort Knox? Coincidence. But a corpsman in the Sierra Nevadas at 9,000 feet seeing the exact same thing that a recruit saw in the swamps of South Carolina? A ranger at Fort Benning watching one of these things come out of a shipping container like it lived there? At some point, the coincidence explanation starts requiring more faith than the alternative. I promised you an Air Force story in Part 1. And I got some angry emails from airmen telling me that they do, in fact, go outside sometimes. So, in the interest of inter-service diplomacy, I want to acknowledge that yes, the Air Force does conduct field training. And yes, some of it takes place in actual woods. I'm told there was even a time an airman had to sleep in a tent. No mint on the pillow. No turn-down service. Just a sleeping bag and the cold, hard ground. He received a Purple Heart for emotional distress. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Mostly. But in all seriousness, one of the accounts I'm currently working on for a possible Part 3, and yes, there's enough material for a Part 3, involves a TACP, a Tactical Air Control Party Specialist, who encountered something during a joint exercise at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. So, airmen, your time is coming. You won't be left out. Just make sure the story pairs well with a nice Chardonnay and a round of golf. Also, I want to address something that's come up in the comments and the emails. A lot of people are asking me, Luke, do you believe these stories? And I'll say the same thing I always say. It doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is what these men and women experienced, and whether their accounts, taken together, point to something that deserves serious attention. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a cryptozoologist. I'm a storyteller. I find these accounts, I verify what I can, and I present them to you. What you do with them is up to you. But if you're asking me personally, off the record, just between us, yeah, something's out there. I don't know what it is, but too many good people have seen it for it to be nothing. To the veterans and active duty service members who reached out after Part 1, thank you. Your willingness to share these experiences, knowing full well the scrutiny and skepticism that comes with it, takes courage. And if you're out there and you have a story you haven't told anyone yet, my inbox is always open. wartimestories@gmail.com. I read every single one. With that, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting, everything and anything you guys do to help support this show. We here at Wartime Stories sincerely appreciate it. As always, a huge shout out to both our patrons and our YouTube channel members for your incredible ongoing support. May God be with each and every one of you, no matter what you're dealing with. And I will see you in the next episode. Stay out of the woods.